that you have a family, you might have some kids, you're wanting a nicer car. As you are getting older, you might be getting a little softer, not wanting to sleep on the floor, you want a king mattress. Lifestyle creeps up on all of us, and I think we can all admit that we're going to need to generate cash now, and you need something that's more liquid than hard assets like long-term rentals. And so some of us try to do it with Airbnbs, short-term, mid-term rentals, but in all reality, it's a business that you need to create more income. All right, today we are doing something a little different. My team has sent me some Instagram Reels, TikToks. I'm going to do some live reactions. I also want to make sure that you know that Copper's with us up here in the corner. He's going to join us. He's going to have some reactions potentially as you choose his tennis ball. This is the real life of trying to get some content made in between actually being a property manager. I appreciate you following along, and let's get into some opinions between the people we all know and me locally, a Knoxville property manager, on some reactions and my opinions based on these videos.
Real estate is an awful way for you to actually make money. Option one, you can go buy a single family home for $400,000, the average price in the US, and then you rent it out to somebody. Well, the average rent nets you, profit-wise, about $167 a month. So you're taking a $400,000 risk for a couple $100 a month. Then you take the average small business, you could buy same way you could for buying a piece of real estate. So $400,000 business, you put some money down and get the rest from the SBA or seller financing, and the average small business makes 10 to 15% per year. You're cash flowing tens of thousands of dollars from a business instead of real estate.
So, Cody, I think her name's Cody, she's 100% right. We all understand that real estate is more of a wealth maintainer slash a retirement plan down the road. And this is something that I realized as a wholesaler back in the day. Some of you may actually know me from wholesaling. I thought that I could wholesale my way into buying enough rentals to then live on the cash flow. And then I started realizing the average deal I was selling to an investor, they were going to be lucky if they would cash flow $100 to $200 a month between the mortgage, interest, taxes, vacancies, maintenance, property manager cost. All of these things make it impossible to basically have a lifestyle that most of us want once we start expanding our risk in entrepreneurship off these properties from day one, or even 5 years or 10 years in. I think people that came from pre-COVID times got so much equity and so much rental increase that it's possible for them. But for the most of us, we have to get rich by building a business and then maintain staying rich by owning assets that appreciate, which is a really basic concept for most people that are watching this. And so she's 100% right. If you think you're going to get rich on owning rentals, you're going to have to figure out a vehicle to buy those rentals in the first place, because on an average deal, I think most of us would sign a contract today for guaranteed rentals with only 20 grand in, meaning, if I could guarantee every door from now on that I buy only requiring $20,000 out of my own pocket to create that $100 or $200 cash flow, that's still, let's say it creates $200 of cash flow. Say I want to make 60 grand a year, which we all, probably need more these days. So divide that by 12. So I need $5,000 of cash flow. So 5,000 divided by $200 of cash flow per house means I need to get 25 rentals. So even on a modest, income that I'm trying to go and get $60,000, which is not life-changing money, we could all go out and get that in a W-2, most of us without even a degree. You're going to need 25 rentals, and you're going to have to spend, like I said, if I made a deal with the devil or God, whoever you want to say, and said, hey, will you give me a rental for only me bringing $20,000 to the table, most investors would sign that deal. And so even at best case scenario, 25 rentals with a modest goal of $60,000 of income a year with $20,000 on each of those units, it's going to take $500,000 of true cash to even generate that kind of cash flow. The reality is you got to find a vehicle to get $500,000 to even generate that, which means you're going to have to get rich before you start living off of the income of your rental properties. And it will take a lifetime, which is why I started a property management business. I really put my head to the table and realized that when I was wholesaling, I wasn't going to generate enough cash to then go out and buy these deals, because the juiciest deals I found were what made my business model as a wholesaler actually profit. So I either made the $500,000 or found the really good deals. And I'm not saying wholesalers cannot be successful and turn their business into something long term that then turns around and creates wealth in owning real estate. However, I would rather go and spend my time building a property management business like I have for the last 3 to 4 years. So that way, when I do have those doors, I have my own staff and I can control the quality of tenants, the cost of maintenance, and actually profit even more cash flow wise, because I own the properties and I have the cash flow from that, and I have the property management business profiting as well. So once again, it just shows I had to go build a business, which was Stonebrook Properties, a property management company in Knoxville, Tennessee, before I could start buying my own rentals at scale. And I'm still at the end of that process of the business and starting to put my focus in buying hard assets like homes in the near 6 to 18 months. I plan to buy at least 1 to 3 houses. What's crazy is you actually have to get rich a different way, and most of the time that's business. But that goes into the next subject. Are you talented enough to go buy someone else's business and know how to take it over and scale that margin, because you're going to have debt behind you? I always recommend starting a business that can start as a job. So for me, a property manager, that's to a lot of us just someone's career or job that they do during the day. But what's funny is if you're a property manager and you're managing 10, 15, 20 doors, eventually you're going to get to the point where you're going to have staff. You're going to have a better tech stack, which is like all the software you use. And eventually it's going to make more sense for you to go on your own and start your own brokerage than to be under your own broker that you currently are working under as an employee. So if you know how to connect with landlords, provide that service, it's actually like a really good business model, because you can start day one as just, it's a job. And then day 365, it could start turning into a business and you can scale out of it. And the other craziest thing is it's one of the hottest businesses to sell right now, which means you're going to make a better multiplier when you go and exit, if you do plan to do that. And that exit could be the actual strategy in getting enough cash to then go and put in hard assets like rentals, and then that can maintain your wealth. But you will not create wealth through owning long-term rentals. You will maintain it, and you will eventually create it as it grows over the next 20, 30, 40 years. But in that time, you will still need a career, you will still need a business. And so you need to measure your talents and your abilities and say, should I buy a business, or should I start it, or should I be the second, third, fourth person inside of a business helping that leader? And from that standpoint, you will succeed. You will start getting hard assets, and then you will start seeing that appreciation, cash flow increase throughout the career while you go make your lifestyle with your business. So you will start seeing that success with your appreciation of your properties. However, you still won't be able to afford your lifestyle, assuming you're trying to grow that. You have a family, you might have some kids, you're wanting a nicer car. As you are getting older, you might be getting a little softer, not wanting to sleep on the floor. You want a king mattress. Lifestyle creeps up on all of us, and I think we can all admit that we're going to need to generate cash now, and you need something that's more liquid than hard assets like long-term rentals. And so some of us try to do it with Airbnbs, short-term, mid-term rentals, but in all reality, it's a business that you need to create more income.
Buying a house, worst investment you'll ever make in your entire life. Let's say you paid $1 million to buy a house. Average house here is $576. $576 is what you paid. Now you need 12% for broker fees. Let's say you keep the house 10 years. You need 10% in maintenance fees. It's 1% a year in maintenance fees. It's about 2% in property taxes every year. That's 20%. 2 times 10 is 20. And it's probably 7% to the bank, so that's 70%. Total those up, it's 112%. $576,000 home will have to be sold for $1.2 million in 10 years. You're not not going to sell it for that. To break even, dead money, and you had to put $100,000 down to do this deal. They're serving a master. They'll borrow money from the Bank of America, and then if they can get some more money, they'll have a little retirement account that funds Wall Street. This is a big game, bro. Rather than buying one house, rent where you live, and take that $100,000 and go buy a piece of real estate where other people live. I just don't need to own a home on the way up. I need to own assets that pay me on the way up. And once I have enough cash flow from the assets, then if I want to go buy a house or a watch or a car, I buy it out of the passive income.
This is something I go back and forth on, and it's actually just depends on the scenario. Imagine that. However, when you look at buying a house, and Grant Cardone is here saying that it's a terrible idea, he does have really good points. However, some of us just have like no ability to stretch what rent is going to become next year. My wife and I in Knoxville, we actually rented a 1-bedroom for like $800 when I first moved down here in 2021. And then by 2022, 1 year later, that lease hit us at $1,400 for the same unit. And it really shocked us. So then, long story short, we actually bumped our own budget up, went to luxury instead of like B-class multifamily. So we moved out to Oak Ridge. We paid like $1,600. We got 2-bedroom, 2-bath, brand new construction. But bottom line is, our housing budget went from $800 to basically $1,600 in the last like 4 to 5 years. And yes, COVID happened, very craziness, but it really did teach a lot of people, including us. One of the benefits of buying a house is locking in that cost of living. And historically, it's been the opposite. Lock in your cost of living with a rental, because you know that if anything breaks, you won't have to fix it, have surprise maintenance, and all these other things. But when landlords are bumping prices left and right, and maybe not even maintaining units, most of America might start looking towards buying at that point for a better option. Not saying they're actually going to go that direction and do it. I think we're turning into a renter nation culturally. But if you were actually looking at the dollars and cents, we're now living in 1,000 square foot home, a rancher, and it's honestly pretty controlled cost, because unless an HVAC goes out, our mortgage is the same. We're out in county, so our taxes are probably not going to increase significantly every year. And so we can actually control our family cost with living in a small home. But if you go get one of those McMansions, one of those boomer homes that, is 2,500, 4,000 square feet, yeah, you're going to get nickel and dimed left and right, because you're always going to have something that needs a little bit of repair. You're going to decorate during the holidays, all these things that add up in cost to make this home just survive through the next 20 or 30 years. I think, at that point, renting a large home would make more sense compared to buying, because the higher rent you can afford, those bigger homes, you can take on less risk because there's less people in the market that can pay that as well. So you can negotiate with your landlord very easily. Secondly, no surprise costs, and really like flexibility, because most people are moving more often than they did 30, 40 years ago. So the renting option is something that we actually might jump back in the market being tenants once we leave this home, and this house will turn into a rental. So it's more about like, you have your lifestyle, you have where you're at in your life, just like pre-kids, children, if you're married. There's so many things that will dictate whether owning or renting is a good option. When you look at it financially, it can go left or right. If you live in a modest home like we do, that's like 1,000 square feet, you're not going to have like too many surprise costs as long as you did a proper inspection on the home, and as long as your HVAC is fairly new, your roof is good, and the plumbing has been updated. There's not a lot of things that are going to go wrong, to be honest. And I think that, us personally, I'm speaking from taking my own medicine. We moved into a home because we were sick and tired of rent constantly increasing. And so it's the bet of, will rent keep increasing so much that it actually saves us money if we purchase? Or is owning a house so much riskier based on surprise costs that renting, even though the rent goes up, is still cheaper. And what's funny about this is Grant's talking about like, oh, if you had $100,000 down payment, blah, blah, blah. It's like there are so many programs where you don't need any money down. We bought this house with 100% debt, which means we didn't put a dollar down. And I actually represented myself and the seller. So I actually made $15,000 in commission when I moved in on the first day. And then we renovated the whole thing, new carpet, painted the whole house, took the popcorn ceiling off, new floors throughout the whole house. We did new kitchen cabinets. We did dishwasher, oven, microwave. Basically, we did a full renovation. Could move in on day one and not actually have any money out of pocket to do that. And so that was cheaper than even putting a deposit down on a rental. So nevertheless, do what you think is right, but keep an open mind, because owning can come with its benefits and its negatives. Probably has higher risk as you buy larger assets and have to maintain them. But if you buy smaller homes that could easily convert to rentals, it's actually, you know, we all call it house hacking at this point. So very modern, very popular. So leave your comments down below what you think. Copper's sitting here. He's just chilling, eating a tennis ball. So he really doesn't care if we rent or own.
I have a refrigerator worth $500. The ice maker goes out, and I get a bill from the property manager for $900. Why? Well, they said, oh, the ice maker went out, and the tenant called. And so we had someone come out and they said, oh, the little valve behind the refrigerator's leaking a little bit. But they couldn't just buy it from Home Depot. It was a special order valve. By the time it's done, I spent $900 to keep a $600 refrigerator alive. That pissed me off. Why would you spend more than what the refrigerator's worth? It's stupid stuff like that. I don't want to think about it anymore.
Honestly, you know, this guy's talking about a refrigerator getting repaired for $900 versus the refrigerator was $600 in the first place. I kind of call bull crap on that, because honestly, refrigerator with the ability to produce ice and water is probably significantly over $600. And it's actually, I'm going to take this conversation in a whole different angle than you expect. This landlord probably bought that refrigerator for $600, and it was probably back in like 2019. And then now in 2025, he's paying for a repair bill that's like $300 over the cost of what he originally paid for it. He probably got that refrigerator for like from Facebook Marketplace or something, blah, blah. The reality is property managers have to do scalable activities. They could easily have bought a brand new fridge. If they would have bought a brand new fridge, that landlord would have said, well, why didn't we just go in there and fix the little part? The property manager sent in from this story the vendor that can work on appliances. That appliance vendor was probably there and said, hey, this, and this is what we need to do. And they probably billed a lot of that $900 on labor, not materials. So that's a negotiation that the property manager needs to go back and attack. However, them getting that bill and then paying for it was where the mistake was made. And so, you know, I'm trying to display a story where the landlord just thinks it's common sense to then get a new fridge, but the property manager was trying to do the cheaper route that accidentally turned more expensive. At that point, you kind of got to negotiate. And here's another caveat. The property manager has a relationship with that vendor where they're probably trying to maintain it, so they don't necessarily want to like beat that person up. This is a scenario where, you know, it's extreme, so they probably should have. However, they're probably using that vendor across all the properties they do, and sometimes they probably get pretty good deals, and other times they get really bad deals. And that's what we see with smaller vendors. And property managers use smaller vendors because they're trying to save money for the landlord, because smaller vendors probably don't have as organized or standardized pricing, which wins for certain landlords and it loses for others. And so that's where that property manager kind of needs to start expectations off right, where it's like, hey, I need you to go out to the property. I need you to look at the fridge. But if it's going to cost more than a new fridge, I'm not interested. Even if it costs the same as a new fridge, I'm not interested. I'd rather have all new parts than just one part that's new. And that's where a little bit more detail could go into those conversations so this doesn't happen. However, this kind of stuff does happen to us because you as a property manager have to move fast and have standardized movements. And so, when you're on those assembly lines, things get put on that are broken, and it keeps going down that assembly line because they're trying to get it out the door and completed. So it looks as though a property manager is making just some dumb mistake that should have never happened. However, when the property manager has a standardized procedure that if something's broken, an appliance vendor goes out and reviews it, secondly, they fix it, that right there is probably where the mistake was made, where there wasn't a set price decided on whether the vendor will move forward with the repair or pause. A lot of times property managers are nervous to pause because they know that that vendor will still bill them for the labor hours that they were there. So then it's just this weird scenario where you have a vendor that put time into going out to the property and reviewing it. You have a landlord expecting the cheapest, best route long-term for the property. And then you have the property manager trying to follow standardized procedures. And a lot of times those three things don't mix very well. And so someone has to take a loss. And if the vendor takes a loss, that's a hit on the relationship between the vendor and manager. Or if the landlord takes the loss, obviously they're going to be pissed at the property manager. And then if the property manager takes a loss, they don't make enough money per month on a unit to eat a $300 difference. So, if it was something significantly negligent by the property manager, they may want to refund at least $300, if not more, to the landlord. However, they really don't have to because they don't have anything in their agreement, at least most people don't have in their agreement something that states that they're going to refund the landlord if something's off on price based on someone's opinion. That's really tough to write legally. And the property manager just does not make enough money per property. Like this gentleman, probably a house rents for $3,000. So if the manager charged 10%, that's $300 a month. So if that property manager discounts their service to make the landlord happy, they will make zero revenue that entire month and take on cost of the bookkeeping, the actual maintenance oversight that they may have neglected the process in, the leasing side of things, and many more hours that they have to pay their employees. So it's crazy how this kind of stuff happens all the time in our industry. We try to mitigate it, but it's hard when you can't physically get to every property on every maintenance item. We handle over 60 maintenance items a month. And so if we were to promise a landlord that we go out to the property for every single one of those, we would have to change up our pricing model significantly. So takeaway from this, property managers should have a price that they don't go past for any maintenance or any vendor getting paid from landlord's cash. Ours is $500. So in this scenario, this would not happen because the landlord had a broken fridge. Stonebrook calls the vendor to go repair it. Landlord says that the fridge cost $600 back when it was new. We only have a $501 will not get approved. So that vendor would say, hey, it's going to be $900. We would then turn back around and give a couple options to our landlords. It's called a 131. Go look up Dan Martell, Buy Back Your Time. That 131 is in that book. We are going to email the landlord, number one problem, 3 solutions, and then the solution we believe in. So once we're in this 131 scenario, we would say, hey, Mr. Landlord, the big obstacle is that we have a fridge that's broken with the ice machine. You have 3 solutions. Number one, you can ignore it. However, you'd be breaking the lease because the tenant living in this unit was reasonably assuming that the fridge would always be working in all of its components. So that would be a bad option, but we try to give 3. Option 2, we replace the entire fridge. Option 3, we go with this repair that's $900. And then they would email us back and say, you big dummy, buy me a new fridge. I'm not spending $900 on repairing one little part. And then we would move forward. And that's how you, in my opinion, get the landlord involved, but make sure that you look like the professional, give them a few options, let them make the final decision, and then move forward with that decision swiftly. And so all parties should be happy at that point, and you making sure that the same requirements you have with your landlord are expressed to your vendor, so that way that vendor knows when they're going out the story, the situation, and what you can say yes and what you cannot say yes to.
I own 15,000 houses.
15,000 houses. Okay. Which you give it out for rent.
Yeah. So nothing wrong with buying a house.
Yeah.
Difference is I use debt to buy it.
Okay.
and I pay no taxes. It's not the house, it's not the stock, it's not the bond, it's your brains. In 1971, this became debt.
Okay.
The only way it's created is somebody has to borrow money. So in your credit card, there's no money in your credit card.
Right.
There's no money anywhere. So the moment you use your credit card, money is created. And they need people to borrow money. So when I go to a bank and I say I want to borrow $20 million, I get huge tax breaks because I'm creating money. But if I use my credit card, I get nothing.
I heard a crazy rumor that you are quitting real estate investing.
Done with it.
Done?
I'm done. Dude, I sold one of my places in West LA. I love the place. But the thing is, once I get a tenant in there, the rent control is so strict that I lose complete access to my property. The other thing is that I could only increase the rents by $60. So everything else goes up more than my rent. The other thing is that once a tenant goes in there, the only way to get them out legally is I have to move back in, and then I also have to pay them a relocation fee of $38,250. So as much as I would have liked to have just kept the property and rented it, there's zero benefit for me to deal with the hassle for that.
So, I mean, obviously these videos are just clickbait, and I understand that this gentleman has probably scaled his wealth so significantly large that he actually doesn't even need optimal returns. He probably prefers to have quiet returns. And like the most quiet return possible is literally just putting your money in a high yield savings account. You know, your ability to get 3 to 5% back. If you are, you know, let's say you're putting, this gentleman probably has like 5 million liquid in cash, minimally. He's a big YouTube star. He's built his wealth through financial advising and teaching people how to be financially literate. And so he probably has multiple streams of businesses, speaking events, and his own YouTube channel. And so for him to have 5 million liquid in cash is not to think that that's impossible. So 5 million on, let's say, a modest 4% a year, it's $200,000. So money grows, and it grows better and better and better as you have more. Obviously, you know, the rich get richer kind of concept. And so, you know, when you have that much money and you're sick of the noise, you scaled that mountain, you might actually want to do something that's a little quieter with your returns, a little safer, you know, pulling off the gas from so much offense and so much risk, because you have more to lose now than ever. And so, you know, he's saying all this with trendy, you know, probably laws that are in California. I'm here in Tennessee managing properties where you can tell people what the rent is. Whatever market rent is whatever you decide as a landlord, and whatever you can convince somebody to pay. And you can get people out in 4 to 12 weeks time, and you can put them to collections. And really the state of Tennessee and a lot of the Midwest and South has very reasonable landlord laws, so reasonable that I think certain landlords take advantage of it and honestly should work with a property manager, because I see, you know, accidental fair housing law being broken with how they approve tenants, and I see, you know, neglect on maintenance, but it's not necessarily because they don't have the money or want to repair. They just get so emotional with that tenant that they don't want to see or feel like they lost in certain ways. So again, I think this guy has gotten burned maybe 100 times owning real estate and has not figured out a way to just leave his emotion at the door, especially because we just went over a video of him talking about his property manager making a mistake that was like $900. So bottom line is, like, if you don't have a high emotional tolerance of risk and being able to let people live in your home, which is what you're doing as a landlord, don't do it. You know, simply don't do it. And I really highly suggest you look into quieter, less riskier investments. If you've made it to the top, I mean, shoot, if you're a billionaire, why even own real estate when you can just literally put it in high yield savings accounts and make millions of dollars in returns guaranteed? But hey, that's just me, some broke property manager giving some stupid advice.
Well, in one of your YouTube videos, you actually said that you're currently $600 million in debt. No?
1.2 billion.
1.2 billion. Okay.
I've seen this guy talk before. It's Robert Kiyosaki. I've actually met people that have physically paid money to sit down and learn from him. Some people say he's a bit of a kook. Other people say he's a genius. He did write Rich Dad Poor Dad, which is probably one of those first books any entrepreneur sits down and reads. Has some good concepts. Honestly, this guy, he said before, when you get so much debt, it gets to the point where you have leverage over the bank, because they lent you out so much money they don't want you to lose. I don't know how accurate that would be, because you'd have to be in the 1% of the 1% for banks to probably bow down to you compared to you bow down to them. I don't think that's necessarily even possible to get a bank to bow down to you, and that's what he has said in past videos. In this video, I think he's just, being trendy and trying to explain that borrowing money is not bad. I've even seen people that are so irresponsible as like a flipper in our local market back, post-COVID, kind of getting out of COVID, where they borrowed the money to flip the home, and then their timeline on their renovation took 6 months longer than they expected. They paid the hard money lender more and more and more monthly, and eventually, oddly enough, they sold the house for 20% higher because the market was just shifting up and up and up and up. And so the longer they held on to that flip, the actual more money that they made when they went to exit on the sale, which is just absolutely insane, which teaches me that even dumb people that risk it because they're playing with debt in an asset that normally appreciates, that's an extreme example of them succeeding even though they missed their timeline, missed their budget, and still was rewarded. We can still see the opposite happen. However, if you own assets and you own them through debt, you're creating wealth out of thin air, because you cannot go into a bank and say, hey, I want to put 20% down on this Tesla stock, and I want you to finance the other 80% I'm trying to buy. That's not possible. You have to do cash to cash purchase. However, with real estate, it's absolutely insane how you can go in and say, easy math, $100,000 shotgun house, and put down $20,000, and that bank lends you the other 80. You didn't have the 80, but now you have a tenant starting to pay off that debt, and you will eventually own all $100,000 of that home. Not even talking it going up in value, not even talking about the rent increasing and paying it off faster. You are quite literally giving someone 20 grand and waiting later on to be given back 100 if you sell it. And that doesn't even go in the conversation of how many times this dude has probably refinanced his portfolio, which is why every video you see, he has more units than the last. He had 12,000 in the first, 15,000 units in the next. Some people were assuming he was 600 million in debt. Now he's 1.2 billion. He's constantly refinancing all of his money, and he believes that if he constantly gets in more debt, think of this, the house is paid off. A $100,000 home that you just bought 15 years ago is now paid off. You pull out that 80 grand again. He's doing that on all of his properties. The difference is they have become more and more valuable based on that rent roll, based on that market price that it could be sold for, that he's getting in more and more debt to then go buy more. And it's this cycle where he's constantly avoiding taxes because debt is not taxed. When he refinances a house, he's not getting taxed. And so he sees that as a high leverage benefit. However, someone like Dave Ramsey is going to say, when the tide goes out, we're going to see who's naked and who's wearing shorts. And so these are those two mega influencers that one saying, Dave Ramsey, you better have your shorts on because the tide does go out once in a while. Where this guy's the complete opposite trend of just be in all the debt you can, because if I'm naked and the tide goes out, what's the bank going to do? So, the reality is somewhere in the middle. You don't want to be like Dave Ramsey anymore and save up all the cash to buy it. You'll never get there. And you don't want to be like Robert Kiyosaki where you're leveraging every single one of your rentals, because you as a probably normal American need to play it right in the middle, leverage debt for success, but don't leverage it so far where you start inhibiting cash flow to the point where you get foreclosed on all of your properties, and all of that risk was for nothing.
So here's my perspective at 63 from having done real estate since 1978.
Yep, I want to hear this.
The highest risk real estate that you can do is resort real estate. because it comes and goes based on the economy, and it's the first to go and the last to come back. So if you're building beachfront condos, you're asking to die, okay? It's the worst, okay? Long-term play real estate, something that is a basic cash cow, warehouses, apartments, office buildings, strip centers, that kind of stuff. Long-term real estate is, of the real estate investment side, probably the least risk. But developers developing residential lots, they are the highest risk except resort. If you're a developer right now sitting on, 500 lots and you don't have that equity position set and you don't have the cash flow structure, this current slowdown is going to take you down.
He's talking about the hospitality industry compared to the real estate market. That is so much of why I decided to go manage long-term rentals. I do not want to be in a industry that's predicated on the economy. People aren't going to go on vacation if they ain't got no money. And before you say they're going to use their credit cards, those probably have been maxed out now because we're just going into 2026 and people are leveraged to the gills on what they owe on personal debt. And I see this every day because I look through 1 to 3 applicants daily to approve for our apartments, houses, duplexes, quadplexes, and I can see what they have on their credit card bills. And the reality is they can't even get a credit card to say yes to them to then go to that Gatlinburg vacation. And so that's what we're seeing right now. Down in Sevierville, things are shifting. Rental rates are shifting. And can the people that own those cabins still pay those mortgages off? And they will be learning that lesson that they are not in real estate. They are in the hospitality industry. And maintaining demand on their cabin is what they have to stay true on accomplishing until the market shifts and people can spend more and, let's say, seasonality brings back the tourism. And so I'm not trying to speak fear into anyone. I don't pay attention to the Sevierville market at a great level of detail. However, if you go onto Airbnb, Expedia, Vrbo, you can see that these prices are a lot different than they were 2-3 years ago. And when you go and look for those vacation cabins to buy, they're sitting on market much longer than, once again, 2 to 3 years ago. And that's because the hospitality industry shifts so much more significantly up and down than real estate. You want to own assets that can be stabilized in any market, and the best format and the best way to test if buying that rental is a good idea, even if your main focus is Airbnb, is will it work for a long-term rental? So talk to a property manager that manages long-term tenants, and before you go and buy that cabin in Gatlinburg, and say, hey, worst case scenario, what would this rent for if I could put like a 12-month lease on it? And you're going to get that number, and you need to make sure that that fits the bill for the mortgage, interest, taxes, and insurance. And it probably won't. And that's the reality of why those cabins are not long-term rented. They're all short-term rented. And that's why they have to play the game up there in the mountains. All right, well, thanks for sticking around. I hope you got a little information off of this, a little entertainment. If you want to leave a comment down below, it would mean the world. We're trying to do a little bit different content in 2026, explore different things like reaction videos, teach more on property management like we already have in 2025, and ultimately keep building this channel. So if you enjoy this, you like property management, you're in real estate, specifically focusing even on Knoxville, subscribe, like, comment, let me know your thoughts on if you're a Dave Ramsey guy or if you're a Robert Kiyosaki dude, because they are significantly different. And if you had to choose one, which direction would you go? Can't go in the middle. Like I said before, pick one or the other. Rents due.